You've been home for a couple of years now, buddy, but you're still fighting the war.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Shoulder to Shoulder, Untold Stories from a Forgotten War, where we tell stories to help bridge the Civ-Mel gap. I am one of the co-founders of Grumpy Combat Veteran Media, and as always, well, sometimes she wasn't there in episode 10, and I cried a little bit inside, just inside that she wasn't there.
You
But
do that with or without me.
I know. As always, Kate K. How you doing, Kate?
I feel great. I don't feel attacked by you on this beautiful morning at all.
No. I'm not trying to guilt you into because you
Just
missed an
showing up.
episode. I wouldn't do that to you.
No, you would never.
Okay. Well, we are very excited and thrilled to have our guest. And if you are involved in Afghanistan or know about Afghanistan or have been doing evac work for the last 2 years, you don't need an introduction, but I'm going to do it to you anyways. Beth Bailey is a stringer for Fox News Digital and regularly contributes opinion content to the Washington Examiner. She worked in intelligence as an Army civilian prior to falling by something of an accident into a writing career. I tell you what, how you doing, Beth?
I'm awesome. It's always good when I get to be with you guys. So it's a
man.
great morning.
I know. I tell you what, for those of you that don't know Beth, go get on Twitter, follow her, get on the social medias, whatever those may be, and make sure that you're reading all of her work. She's an excellent reporter. She has a good understanding of a wide range of problem sets. So she writes about Afghanistan very well, but is also starting to write about other terrorist groups throughout the Middle East. And I am always reading your stuff and sending it to all the smart people who somehow talk to me.
I appreciate that. That's like the greatest compliment I've received, and I don't even know how long. So thank you.
You're welcome. So let's get started. I'm somehow in charge of this affair, and God help us all. Hopefully, I won't drive the podcast right into the ditch. But you never know; it could happen.
Currently,
it could happen. So, Beth, I want to know your story because I didn't really meet you until maybe late last year. And I was like, I didn't know about your podcast. I just kind of started, talking more publicly about Afghanistan. So. How did it all? What's the origin story of the podcast? And then we can talk a little bit about your Army career or your civilian career in the Army.
Yeah. So the podcast started because after the fall, I got pulled into, just like so many did, trying to cover what was happening or trying to help with what was happening. And I made all these contacts, and then I was scrolling Instagram one day, had this new follower, looked at his feed and saw that he had a group of Afghan children on his dock in the city where I lived, which is tiny. And I was like, what in the hell is happening here? I sent him a message and I said, I don't usually tell people where I live, but you live where I live, and there are a bunch of Afghans on your dock, and what is going on here? And so we met up for coffee. It was Michael Cook, and he said we talked for 2 hours about Afghanistan. It was the first time I had sat in person with somebody and talked to them about Afghanistan and didn't feel like they wanted me to shut up. And it was just so amazing. It was for so many reasons, it was exactly what I needed at the time. And he said, you should start a podcast. And I was like, that's funny. Who would listen to me? And then I hit him up a couple weeks later and said, no, you know what? We should start a podcast. He was writing a book about Afghanistan and about working, during the fall to get his interpreters out and then helping other interpreters get out. And I just thought, between the two of us, we should really do this. And I came to him with a big list of people who I wanted to interview, and the idea that on top of interviewing all these Westerners, we should also have Afghan voices on, because it's more authentic hearing from Afghans about what they have experienced during all this time. And so I just had a list of both of those groups, and I said, here's how I think we should do this. And
Wow.
He said, okay. And he spearheaded the whole, getting the intro, outro, song, all that stuff. He did all that, and I started contacting people, and we became a squeaky machine at first. I was so terrified.
I bet.
Interviewing people.
We understand that.
Yeah. It's like, it's easy when you're just calling somebody and having talking to them for quotes, because
Sure.
you don't have to sound a certain way or look
Right.
put together or whatever. And it was very different. And I felt immediately, I was like, I've been working on this problem set for how long? I've forgotten that I've been working on that problem set for that long.
Sure.
So it took me a while to get into my comfort zone, but it was an incredible thing. I'm so glad that I met Michael. I'm so glad that we started this, and it has been life-changing. It was exactly what I needed at the time to start taking myself more seriously and really trying to keep Afghanistan in people's minds. It's really important, and nobody wants to talk about it. So it's been incredible to just talk to people about my favorite thing every week.
Yeah.
I think one of the unique things about your podcast that I loved when I first saw it too was it was one of the only projects like it at that time. And one of the things that I loved about your work from day one is that you guys were so objective. Like, you were willing to talk to anybody who had even touched this topic, which meant that any time I was logging on, I knew that I was going to be exposed to a new opinion and a new thought process. And it was one of the only places where people could really get that at that point in the withdrawal. So I also think that your podcast offered a really unique learning point for people who were hearing about Afghanistan and hearing about the withdrawal, but not necessarily understanding it. I think you gave them that basis, and it was so important to people at that time.
I appreciate that. I really tried to be, because Michael and I come from different political backgrounds, and I think we both agreed that we didn't care about politics anymore after Afghanistan happened. And I would have anybody on. I will say there is an exception to that. I will not have anybody on who apologizes for the Taliban or who was part of whitewashing their, their.
You can send them to me.
And things. Yeah. Oh, sure. You can do it all day long. I couldn't. There were a couple people who.
I'm a warm and friendly person.
Oh, I know you are.
Especially
You're going to rip somebody a new asshole. I will send them to you if they ever recommend that again. But yeah, that's my one exception, is I will not have somebody. I would have, actually, we almost had a Taliban one time, but we couldn't get the timing right. I will have a Taliban to lie to my face repeatedly before I will have a Westerner who apologizes for them. Because that, to me, that just suggests that you have no ability to filter out reality. The Taliban.
Do you want to know who the best at that is?
Who?
Do you know who the best sympathizer is? In my opinion, Will Selber. This is just a Will Selber opinion.
Oh, I thought you were about to say that Will Selber was the best sympathizer.
No.
I'm sorry.
No. No, you know who the best is? You know who the best is? Barnett Rubin. Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. He's the best apologia for the... Did you see his quote in The Diplomat about Sirajuddin Haqqani's visit?
What did I saw that
he said that he was no longer a threat to America's interests. I was like,
cute. Yeah. There was a foreign policy piece a year ago that was full of, really respected people saying that we needed to normalize relations with the Taliban. I'm like, dude, have you seen what's happening to Afghan women? Shut the front door. That is unacceptable to me. We're not.
You can say fuck here.
Yeah.
I can. That's
yeah.
Shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Baby.
I was not having it, and that's the
Let
problem.
the hate flow through
more
you.
Of these voices. People who were part of, the Doha agreement and talking about how the Taliban were going to be so great. And now is probably the time to shut up. Now is really the time to just look at what you did and go, I really messed up, instead of doubling down and saying,
we will double down.
Great.
I'll take more of that, please. I'll take more of that. No, look, here's the thing. The Pakistanis have changed. ISI, you can trust those people. I mean, look, they have what's in our best interests at heart. We are allies together.
They're so good to the Afghans.
Oh, yes.
Oh, they were.
Excellent to the Afghans. So have we. So have we in Pakistan, in case you're wondering.
Yeah, no. Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, Beth, when we talk about, talking about Afghanistan, I have started to come across now, as I delve deeper into this, there's some Afghans that I talk to, and rightfully so, that are pretty pissed off about this. And now they're starting to tell me about it. And I'm just like, yep. He's like, y'all betrayed us. And I'm like, no, we did.
But you know what you're offering them that veterans are not getting right now is the acknowledgement that someone was abandoned.
Yeah.
Right? So like, even if for you it feels really crappy to have to look at like an Afghan ally and say, yes, I agree with you, like we backed down and we left you here, they're getting something from you that you're not getting from your own government, which is the acknowledgement of that abandonment.
Mm-hmm.
So it might feel bad, but I suspect that your honesty is actually really helpful for people.
Yeah, they'll let them feel heard and seen, and whereas, as you say, Kate, the government still won't say jack about what they did.
Everything's going well. All
It's
metrics
great.
are green.
It's fantastic.
The over-the-horizon counterterrorism strategy will absolutely be successful. Here, I can say that over and over again. If it's a mantra, you just say it and it becomes magically true.
Yep.
Blink twice.
Because as you know,
as you've been taken over by the Borg.
Right. As you know, you were an Army intel civilian analyst, right? I mean, as you know, right? The intelligence community has been batting about 1,000% when it comes to Afghanistan. It is a fine oiled machine. And when they tell us something is some way, that's the way it is, people.
It's a rubber stamp.
It's a rubber stamp.
Just like, when Bill Raggio was wrong. He was wrong. They did not have as much territory as, so no. There have been so many points of failure that it's just really sad to see it all and exhausting for all the people who tried to keep up.
So how did you become an Army intel civilian? I'm interested. How did that happen?
It was through a random series of crazy accidents, I would say. I mean, I became obsessed with Afghanistan during college. Like, it just unhealthily.
Where would you go to college?
What an extracurricular.
Right? It was very weird. I went to the College of William and Mary, and they had this great new DC
school
program. Yeah, they had a DC program. I took part. You had to study intensively, like 3 different. It was the same topic. You would take 3 courses, and then you needed an internship. And your internship couldn't be like going to get coffee for someone. It needed to be substantive. They checked in with your internship coordinator to make sure you were doing the right thing. And so I was with the oversight committee, the House Oversight Committee, and it was at the time when we were preparing to draw down in Iraq, and things were ratcheting up in Afghanistan. And so a lot of what I was doing
2010
with the no, this was 2009.
Okay.
But it was actually it was 2008-9, so in the fall of 2008. And obviously there were also other things going on, like presidential elections, but it was just a crazy time. And I was with the National Security Subcommittee, so they were always just like, hey, go find this, go find that. And if I didn't understand something, I would highlight everything I didn't understand and go look at that too. And before I knew it, I had, 700 pages of printed content and a really insane understanding of things that I didn't. And then the other thing that happened at the time, they brought me into a group of Pakistani female parliamentarians, and I didn't know anything about Pakistan. And all these women are so interested in me and asking me questions about myself, and I couldn't ask them anything without feeling like an idiot. And I resolved that I would never be in that situation again. So all those things came together.
That's a great story, man.
Oh yeah, I learned a lot, and then from there I decided
it was a good learning.
Yeah, I wrote my thesis on counterinsurgency strategy. So I stayed for another semester and worked on. That time it was War in Memory. So all these things kind of
great book.
No, not the book. It was that was the topic of the course.
Sorry.
But it was basically like we would go to battlefields and see different war monuments and learn about how we commemorate wars and what we remember and what we fail to remember. It was really an interesting course, and during all that time I was still trying to learn everything I could about COIN operations. And then from there I returned to William & Mary for my final year. And I took another Afghanistan semester with an amazing professor, Ronnie Mullen. She is just an amazing woman, and we got to do some incredible things during her course. Wow. And from there I knew, like, I'm going to work in Afghanistan. I sent out dozens of applications to work in Afghanistan, and nobody wanted this fresh college graduate in Afghanistan. Nope. They're like, you are not coming here. I mean, I don't even think anybody even answered me for all the USA job apps I sent in. And then it was crazy. The person I was dating, his mom sold something to this dude who worked at the National Ground Intelligence Center, and she found out that they were hiring. I submitted my application. I sat in that room full of a bunch of salty veterans and I think there might have been some active duty people in there, and then the HR lady. And here I am. I've always looked younger than I am. I probably looked about 17 at the time. I walked into this room and they start asking me, what do you think about McChrystal? What do you think about blah, blah, blah? And I start just pouring out all these acronyms that have become part of my daily lingo. And at one point, the HR rep just laughed. She started laughing and I was like, well, that's either real good or real bad. And, a couple months later, after the whole intake process, there I was. And all that.
So you were at NJIC?
Paid off. Yeah.
You were, so, for the listeners that don't know, I spent 20 years in the intelligence community. Life is not full of ironies, but NJIC, from my experience, is the best. I find their products valuable and something you can get out of them, other than it's not meant for 4 stars, right? It's not meant for briefing the president, whatever. It's meant to provide ground forces with an understanding of the battlefield. I read that stuff voraciously. It was the best intel. I loved it. I thought it was so good. I put NJIC right up there with the Marine intelligence that they put out on the ground on the insurgency stuff. It was good stuff. Sorry.
Yeah, they were
I digress.
Great. I loved working there, and I never like to talk about exactly what I did because, there's the whole, it was classified work and I don't, but I loved that I had freedom to say what I wanted to say. And often I said things that were not popular. And I'm glad that I did that. I'm glad that my leadership totally supported that. And it took me to a lot of really incredible places that I'm not going to talk about on the podcast.
Sure.
But yeah, at the age of 20 something, there was one time we were called to go somewhere. We had to go get our, you had to do your DTS and all that shit. And I couldn't even get a rental car because I wasn't old enough to get a rental car. But I had been called to this bit. I'm like, well, that's interesting. So I felt really supported there, and I loved the people I worked with. They were just really amazing people. So
that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
That's how long were you there for?
From 2010 until early 2013, and that is when I left my job to go get married.
Okay.
And move across the country and leave all of my family and friends 12 hours in my rearview mirror.
Oh, man. Well, I bet you got a lot of good experience out of that 3-year stint with NJIC. Now I know. Now I'm like, man, Beth is on it. Holy smokes, man. When I read your stuff, I'm like, I'm impressed. And because I read a lot of people on Afghanistan and terrorism, and I'm not impressed. So I don't throw that around very easily. And now learning about your background, it makes sense. It's very normal, Beth, for people to just take an interest in counterinsurgency operations. I run into that stuff every day. Never at all. Never once.
I'm sure. They're like, oh, it's really a great,
that is amazing.
I'm strange. I don't know. I'm just strange. And that's the good thing about all of us. We have our strange thing.
It's okay.
I think it helps because so many of the people who want to talk about Afghanistan are coming from an emotional but not necessarily informed place, right? They're just aware of what we've been doing there. They've kind of heard things in the news, and so they come out with these really hot opinions, as opposed to someone like you, Beth, who I think not only do you have the background in it, but your objectivity and the way that you can sort of piece things together, that's what's valuable to people. That's what they should be paying attention to. It's not just, hey, I have an opinion on Afghanistan, because listen, who doesn't at this point, right? Most people have heard about it and want to talk about it, but I think what's valuable in your work is that it comes from this very intentionally mindful and informed place. That's why when people ask me who should I be paying attention to in this community, I send them to Will and I send them to you.
I appreciate that. There's just so much. That's the thing. And that's what William & Mary gave me, is that really big breadth of understanding of, and not just Afghanistan, other places where there have been ethnic conflicts and things, because Afghanistan is informed by a lot of different strata of things that are ongoing. And so I had a very large well to draw from at William & Mary, and then lots of different things. And then, the podcast has just put me in touch with even more people who are, because I couldn't bring any of my research from NGIC on with me. So all those things that I worked on, it's like, oh, well, I don't even remember. I remember the very broad basics, but I still have that background. And then I have all these new people who are telling me about what's continuing to go on in this giant source network. It's kind of amazing. And one day I'd love to write a book about just the whole experience of getting drawn back into that whole, almost as if I was never not there,
I want to read it.
Just been there the whole time. Yeah. Well,
Heck
good.
yeah.
I've got a couple. I've got a couple I'm working on. Yeah, there you go. I love that.
I'm almost done with my memoirs. They're about.
Hey.
I have like 2 more sections, and I've finished the editing process, and I'll start shopping it around and stuff like that.
Have you decided who you're going to dedicate your book to? It's just a question.
I don't know yet.
It's me.
Yes.
This is Kate.
I'm
Yeah.
just wondering.
Yeah. Kate. It's actually the name of the book is called Kate K. I mean, that's basically it.
I've been a very
It's just pictures of you in it.
Thank you. Thank
He's
you.
been
It's
in your
just like a
bushes
little
at night,
flip book.
so
Yeah.
It'd be super cute. Who
Yeah,
wouldn't love
I know
that?
you're there though, buddy.
I'm always watching.
You're always watching.
Just remember that, Sarah Juden
You're always
Haqqani.
watching Kate K.
Hey, Pakistani ISI, I know you're listening to this show. I just want you to know that I know. I know. I see you lurking.
We're happy to have you here.
I see you lurking on my Twitter account.
Oh, God.
I see you. It's okay, baby. We gonna reconnect again soon. Sorry, I digress. I like to trash talk these people because they're not that smart. Anyways, so moving right along, let me ask a question about like your career as a writer. Like you kind of stumbled upon it. How?
Well, when I got to my new home, way far from all of the people, my then husband was working 60 hours a week and then working on his car on the weekends. And I had a lot of time to myself. And I decided I was going to write a book because for me, everything changed. I was so interested in war as a concept, right? And the idea of like, oh, look at all these things that we're developing to conduct war. And the part of that story that I didn't mention earlier is that as I started at NGIC, I had fallen madly in love with this young Marine who was going through IOC in Quantico, the infantry officer course for people who don't speak acronym. But it was the beginning of the surge. All of the things were coming out about people just dying because of how horrifying, and we knew that it would be, right? We were trying to get land back from the Taliban in the places where they cared about most. And so we had sent in all these Marines to do that. And I realized, oh my God, what am I doing? I'm part of this. At one point, actually, a woman came into my cubicle and I had his name taped on the back of my cube wall. And she said, "Lieutenants have the lifespan of a fly over there." And I just, oh yeah, gut punch. And right? Well, and it's like that dark humor of the military, right? Will's over there laughing because he knows exactly who says things like that.
No, I have dark humor too, but that's the kind of thing you don't throw in someone's face.
Probably not a good idea. I wouldn't do that.
And socially not the best, but she just was, and I didn't think it was funny. I was
down in the field. That would be funny.
Mm-hmm. But that's the thing is that changed my mindset, right? I went from like war is great to, oh my God, I am part of this machine that could kill this person that I love so deeply. And so I had decided that once I moved to this place where there weren't skiffs anymore, T-skiffs, there weren't places where I could work and that I could take my DC, metro area education and work experience and apply them. And so I started writing a book about that experience. And so it's loosely based on reality, but fictionalized. And I wanted to, because I felt like so many people hadn't been touched by the war in the entirety of the time that we had been there. And this was 2013 when I started. And I wanted to make them hurt, as like the people who lost people in the war did. I wanted them to understand that experience. And it sounds so bad that I wanted them to hurt, but I wanted them to feel the pain in their hearts. And I think that literature can do that in a way that, all the stats in the world are never going to do that. And so I started doing that. My first endeavor, I just was like, I thought I'm an intel analyst. I can write and write and write. It was terrible. And so then I basically put myself through, I would call it like a mini poor man's MFA. I read every single book written by an author. about how to write. And then, and you can see, I never show people the other side of this room. It's a mess.
There
with
you
my
go.
kids' things, but those are all the quotes that I mined from there, because writing is hard. It's isolated. Like I said, my ex was working 60 hours a week, and then on the weekends working more on his things. And so it was like just me in this little room with no friends and family around me. And I just would look at those quotes and I would keep freaking going. So, I learned how to write that way. And then during that process, because a book, you can't show, you know, like, here's a chapter. Do you want to publish a chapter? I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know what to do. I had written a bunch of queries, or not queries. I'd pitched a bunch of publishers in New York, because I knew I didn't want to self-publish that. I wanted, if I was going to do it, it was going to go to like Random House or Penguin Books or something like that. So I started writing stories, and it was kind of miraculous, because I would be in these places and all of a sudden there'd be a veteran who would like see my shirt or something, and they would unload these stories that they don't even tell their family. There was one incident where a guy basically was like, he told me about how he graduated West Point and then killed people at the Battle of Panama, and said, how can you feel like a human? And he never even told me his name. But he had seen that I was wearing an Operation Ward 57 shirt that says, for the wounded, the war never ends, or the fight never ends. And he's like, why are you doing that? Are you in the military? He looked at my ex. He's like, you're not in the military because your hair's down to your shoulders. What the fuck? And it was just so amazing. I ended up writing a short story about it. And then I started pulling all these other moments that I had with veterans, just kind of telling me really deep things, and writing short stories about them. And I realized I can be doing so many more things. And that's when I started using stories to work through my own trauma, to, you know, tell stories of people who had touched me. And then when my daughter was a year old, I went through an opinion writing course, and that's when I really took off, because once you get started on that, like, you can't stop.
I love your writing, Beth. You're a very good writer. You're a very good writer.
That.
And you,
Beth is,
yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Kate.
Nope, you go.
No.
Oh, love that. I was just thinking as Beth was talking, I sent this quote to Will actually a couple of weeks ago. Somebody had written this on their LinkedIn account. A guy who I follow, he works in a military. His name is Trent Lithgow. And so his post just said, Hemingway said, write hard and clear about what hurts. And then he said, for professional writers, we could also say, write hard and clear about what matters most. And I think that is the absolute foundational point of what you're saying and what I see in Will's work. It's like, people can't quite understand, like, they'll see these stories that feel really ugly, and they're meant to, because one, like, it offers these people who experienced it a place to heal because they get to share. But I also think that this belief that there are people in the world who are unaffected by war, I don't think that's true. I think that, like, my exposure to it is, of course, really different than Will's. But can I really say, as somebody who grew up as my country was at war for 2 decades, that I was unaffected by it? I don't think so. And so I think that's part of what this storytelling is meant to do, and why it's so important, because it helps people understand, like, this is something that affects you. And we tell these really ugly stories because it's something that, like, your neighbor has also gone through. That should affect you. And so I loved that quote when I saw it, and I sent it to Will, and I said, this is the basis of everything we do.
Yeah, this weekend I went to Scott Mann's Hero's Journey in Topeka, Kansas. It was amazing. I mean, it was the most amazing thing. I was like, there was a Vietnam veteran. His name is Steve. We're going to get him on this show. I guarantee it. Steve did 2 tours in Vietnam as a tunnel rat. Oh my God. And he started something called Point Man Ministries, because he had done so many operations as the Point Man. And his stories were amazing. So he's told this one story, and I think I can do it justice. That there was a guy out in the front of the VA, and he was ranting and raving and stuff like that. And he walked up to him and he was like, hey man, what's going on? And he's telling all the stuff that he done, and I couldn't understand him and blah, blah, blah. And then I told him, I was like, hey man, I was in the 101st. I was, in Vietnam. I told him the Corps that I was in, and the guy was like, he's like, oh my God, you had it worse than me. He's like, well, it's not a competition, blah, blah, blah. And then the raving mad guy goes, hey, how come you're not crazy like me? And Steve said, "What makes you think I'm not?" That was one of the greatest things I've ever heard in my life. And I fell out of my chair laughing. And I said, "I understand." Because I do. I mean, what makes you think I'm not?
Yeah.
Right? And it was the healing power of stories, right? And we heard, it was me, I gave my story. And we heard from other people affected by war, you know, like a old Kansas woman who was talking about her son not coming home from war, or somebody's brother committed suicide, and all that type of stuff. And you see the ripple effects, right? But I think that we have lost our ability to talk to one another and tell the stories that come across our lives. And it was about 10 people, but man, was it powerful. And I think, you know, when we talk about war, we often miss the human aspect of it, what it does to people, because people think it's like some type of algebra problem that if I just write the perfect little white paper or like figure out the perfect little strategy, that somehow I can take all the human emotion out of it, right? No. That's not how this works, right? I don't care what part you're in on this process. There is human emotion involved in it, and you can't strip it of that because it's a human endeavor. So that's just my little spiel about, you know, the power of storytelling. And I think what Kate said, you know, really bears point. I think, you know, your podcast is the first one that I was really listening to, the first one about Afghanistan. And I was like, oh, thank God somebody's saying something. Because when I started listening to you, Beth, I was in a bad place. I was in a bad place. I was hallucinating that some of the Afghans I left behind weren't, you know, I was hallucinating. I couldn't get them out. And yours was the one I was listening to other people who had problems and were trying to make it through. I was like, okay, I just got to make it through command, and then I'm going to go, you know, to the mental hospital. And so like it helped me make it through because I could listen to other people's stories that gave me the confidence that I could continue to work through my issues. So I want to say thank you on behalf of all the active duty and combat veterans that you've helped that you don't know because they haven't reached out to you. So on their behalf, I say thank you.
I appreciate that in a big way. I had this week's episode with Jason Houck and Rob Dufresne and Tony Barnes. Rob Dufresne, I didn't know anything about Jason's friends that he recorded Hold On, Reach Out with before we started, because I've been kind of in the whole, like, it's the end of the school year and my life is insane and, like, you're just triaging, as my former boss said in an email the other day. She's like, you just triage all the disasters as a single mom. And I'm like, oh, preach, woman, preach. But I hadn't been able to do my research on Rob, and Rob just hit me in the fucking gut when he said his transition struggles. He said he'd gotten out after 26 years in the special forces, and he had been so used to, you know, being with all of his people, and now they're gone. And then he said he was struggling with it quietly, internally. He didn't talk to anybody about it. And that was the worst thing he could have done. And now, and this is a guy who is in like 6 or 7 different bands, he told me, but he's healing loudly. And I loved that. I thought that is exactly what storytelling is. It's healing loudly and saying, I struggled with this in the silence, and I'm going to heal loudly so that other people don't have to struggle in the silence. And it's something I'm doing in my own life because I have been healing from a lot of things in the last 2 years, and I will not keep it inside, because
good, you're not supposed to.
No, that's where it turns into poison. And actually, well, I told Rob he's coming on the podcast along with some other great people, and you are one of them. I just haven't told you yet because I knew you'd come,
no
and
problem.
I didn't really like need to give you a bunch of like heads up. Like,
I just get on rant and rave and lunatic as usual.
But I think it's, you know, transition is just such a crazy time, and it's a crazy, all of these things that I've learned through the podcast, they've helped me too. Like listening to people be so bare about the things they're struggling with has given me permission to do the same thing, and it's just so empowering. And that's the thing, is because I
heal loudly. I love
storytelling, right? I didn't know what storytelling we were going to be talking about today, and I was just thinking about some things that I've told stories about, and usually oftentimes in my personal life, there've been times when somebody treated you in a certain way and they thought you were too weak to do anything about it, right? You weren't going to go to the police. You weren't going to do whatever. You weren't going to go tell a teacher. And when you tell the story, maybe you didn't tell the person then, but now you get to control the narrative and you get the power back, and they don't get to have that over you anymore. And I love that for anybody. I just totally recommend, even if it's just for you, even if it's under a pen name, tell the goddamn story.
It never is, because I have had almost 10 years of experience at the VA, and Will has already heard me talk about this book, but one of the things that I have noticed is that Vietnam veterans would not discuss what their experience was until PTSD became like a very known entity in the war on terror. And once people started talking about this is what the combat experience is, and this is how it's affected me, and this is how it affects my family, suddenly we saw a spate of claims from people saying, I didn't understand I had a mental health condition. I didn't understand that there was a version of the world where I could actually talk about these things. And so like we have this very clear data point of when you tell stories, it's healing for you, but it gives permission to other people to talk about their own. And so the book that I just read, and it is one of the best pieces of historical fiction that I have ever come across, is called The Women. I just posted about it on my LinkedIn.
I saw your post.
By Kristen Hanna. And it is, the reason I love this book is because, one, it offers a perspective on what Vietnam was like for people who really didn't understand it and have pushed it out of their consciousness, right? Because it was a long time ago and they think it doesn't affect them, but it does. The other thing that I really loved about it was that it was slow moving. Because I think this notion of war is inaccessible to so many people because it's really overwhelming and it's dirty and it's violent and they can't quite relate to it. And the way that this book kind of built up the experience, like they start talking about the bits and pieces of PTSD, and then a couple of chapters later, they put it together for what it really is. So it was so honest and it was so accurate. And the reason why I loved it is because it's a piece of fiction, it's more accessible to people. Because yeah, it's talking about violence and Agent Orange exposure and PTSD, but it's doing it in a way it feels a little bit less intimidating because it's a fictional character. And that was the reason why I recommend it to anyone. If you think that war is something that is gross and ugly, but you're scared to learn about it, this was the perfect way to do it. So when you were talking, Beth, too, about that first draft of your book and how it's fiction, I remember thinking like that's going to matter to a very specific audience who can't access this story otherwise.
Yeah.
And I was just so grateful for the book, and I'm so grateful for authors like you who keep giving permission to people to tell their stories.
Yeah, and I think that it's like you talk about, when PTSD became a thing. I mean, think about all that we've unearthed since then. We now talk about TBI. We can now talk about moral injury.
Huge.
We can now talk about transition trauma, right? Like, and granted, you can't really do that when you're active duty. It's like Will said, you got to kind of that whole stoic. I mean, you can. There is more acceptance of that. There's still the stigma, right?
It's the stigma. It just depends on where you are and who you're with. Which service, which branch, which MOS, which AFSC, because that's the thing. It's like the military culture big is one thing, but then you start breaking it down, it gets into different things and different, it's just like a tribe, right? And so it's going to be a little bit less in like a combat arms infantry aspect than it is maybe in other ones. But I tell you what, I have seen, and I hit the military all the time, so I think I can do this. I've seen a lot of improvement when I came in my first deployment. How my 06, a Colonel Fulbert Colonel treated me to where we are today. And I think is that a lot of the guys that came up in my generation have started to block and tackle for those below them, or they're trying to create space for them to do that, because the war that they're about to get into is going to be much, much, much worse. If we decide, if it goes how it's going, where there's going to be a real return to great power competition, you have to start getting your people prepared mentally and physically, of course, to withstand such a thing. And now they're starting to take a look at it from a whole of military approach, right? Not just the trigger pullers, they're important, of course, but also from like the intelligence community aspect, because that trauma, oh yeah, it can happen anywhere. That's what my last 2 years in command taught me. I saw what that trauma could do to people, just stateside, watching operations, being in charge of interrogations, reading intelligence reports where there's like pictures of horrible things and you're just digesting that. And then, hey, it's off to pick up little Timmy at school. Right. And what did mommy do today? Oh, I was looking at this pedophile, his entire cell phone record that was extracted and all of the shit that he's done in his damn life. I'm not talking about Sarah Juden Haqqani, but I could be. So these are the things that I'm talking about. These are the things that people will come across, and that trauma is affected by so many people. So I've seen the military come a long way. It's still not perfect, but I say bravo on that aspect of it. There's a whole lot of the other aspect that I give them an F, but on that one, they've done a little bit better. See, I'm fair.
You're candid.
That's
I
right.
think it reminds me of the fact, like, I'm thinking back to my learning everything I could about Afghanistan, highlighting all the things I didn't know. But the more you look at this, especially as a civilian, the more you see different things that you don't understand. And one group that I was thinking about that still holds trauma in this, I'm thinking about my really good friend who's a Marine, and his transition was really difficult, but he never got to see the elephant. He was never deployed to combat. He wanted to be so badly.
I'm sure
that was hard for him to, to then transition out and to, give up what he had prepared himself to do mentally and never happened. And, there are just so many levels of trauma that the military can impart on people, and the more we understand it, the more we can have grace then for all of those things that deserve, that we might not understand if we didn't hear that story. And so that's my goal too, is to just help civilians understand the wide breadth of things that might impact someone who serves, because we just don't do a good job of talking about service. I was talking about it on the podcast the other day about my very first opinion piece, which was about, when we say thank you for your service, a lot of veterans really hate that, because it's just like, well, why are you thanking me? You don't even know what I did. Like, what if I was just like my friend? I never got to see the elephant. Why are you thanking me? Or like the guilt that you might feel, or the shame, or the whatever. Or, you're thanking somebody and you just don't know, like, what did they do? And we need to understand. If we understand better, then we can say, which is why I will say, hey, I ran into a veteran selling these beautiful homemade metal flowers for outside, and he had his his Air Force hat. And I said, when did you serve? That's what I said. I didn't say thank you for your service. I asked him when he served, and we had a really short but lovely conversation about how he served in Vietnam, and it was really tough, and nobody welcomed them when they came home. And I said, I'm really sorry that is what you went through, and you deserved so much better, and thank you for what you did. Because then you can actually say thank you, because you know what it is, right? Yep. And then they know that somebody actually sees them. And that, I think, is so important. People need to feel seen. Storytelling helps people feel seen.
I think it's a moral obligation too. Like, we expect that people are going to sign up for the military and protect us and lose their lives and their livelihoods, and that we don't owe them anything back because it was a choice. And I strongly disagree with that, because we just wouldn't be the country we are if we weren't built on the backbone of what our military can do. And so when we walk up and we just say that very passive thank you for your service, it's actually a really clear way of saying, I don't care enough to know what your actual experience was, because it's probably hard and that makes me feel bad. So one of my questions, Beth, is in getting to talk to all of these people, and you said it's so interesting the way that they can sometimes open up to strangers. I had that experience doing the resilience work. I mean, I know the intimate details of a lot of people's lives without knowing their last name or, where they live. So in doing your podcast, have you had any one interaction or interview that was like particularly touching for you, or like really stands out?
I think my first time talking to Paul Alcobe was really moving because he talked about his mental health journey. And I think he told me straight up, like, you've got to step back. I think he could sense it in me that I was just over my head and I needed to do what he had done, that he had stepped back. And I just, you know how bad it is for somebody when they get there. And then Will, our episode, the first one on moral injury, hit me bad. And I was talking about the young man that I interviewed who ended up killing himself down the road. And just, it brought up so many things. And I thought, this is so fucking important, you know? And you were so candid, and the things you were saying, it's like, fuck, how do you even, at some points you're hearing people say things and you're like, that's just so shitty that you had to do that. And you can't even express the shittiness of having to hear that. But then you appreciate that they have shared it with you. And it's funny. I actually was thinking after talking to Rob Dufresne, because, you know, Hold On, Reach Out is about veteran suicide. That doesn't really fit in the Afghanistan Project podcast. And something I'm thinking about doing is starting a separate, smaller podcast, just listening to people talk about the hard things that they've done and the hard things that they've been through. And like, basically take me to your lowest point and tell me what steps you took that helped you get out. Tell me what you read. Tell me what you did.
I got plenty of friends that could get on that podcast. Let me tell you.
I mean, veterans too, veterans, absolutely. But also just like, you know, I'm thinking about, I had a miscarriage and it was one of the hardest things trying to get through that. I mean, I told people, but you're not supposed to talk about that when, you know, you're not. And so how, you know, I ended up like digging up my entire garden and planting these flowers in honor of the baby that didn't.
Oh, that's beautiful, man.
But it was like, there was a lot. I couldn't get it out. And so that's some way that I did it. I wrote about it, but people have lost so many things. There are so many different kinds of loss that people experience. And to be able to go through that, I think it takes it's
courage,
to do, right?
It takes courage to do it.
Talk about it. It's hard to interview somebody about it. And it's hard to say, I want to show up and hear the hard thing. But what I brought up in the podcast last week is like, I used to listen to veteran podcasts all the time. When I would go running, I would listen to Team Never Quit podcast. You know, Sean Ryan came on TNQP and he talked about the time that he tried to kill himself, I believe, in his car. I don't remember the exact story, but it was like, or he was really drunk and he was in his car and it was running in the garage or something. It was bad. Yeah. And talking about like Dom Rosso would talk about, you know, lifting the heavy box first and all these principles for living and like getting over hard things. And I thought, what does a suburban housewife need this for? Why? You know, it's great to have this, but what do I need it for? And then I needed it. Yeah. And I didn't know when I was going to need it. And I was really goddamn grateful that I had it. And that's what I want is like, when you're in that place, where can you go? You can go there and you can listen to other people who are in that place in different ways. And maybe something that they say will help you get out of bed and help you figure out what do I do next? And how do I just keep putting one foot in front of the other in this really terrible time?
I love this because this is like the whole reason that we started Shoulder to Shoulder. Because I think that you sort of showed Will and I, like, this is how healing this can really be for people. And like, that's the whole basis of it. We want people to come on and to have a safe space to share the really ugly parts of it. Because there are really ugly parts of it. I remember in doing some of the resilience work, I was talking to a veteran who is having a really hard time with his mental health. And I could see it in a way that he couldn't. And, you know, he was like, I just feel like I can't talk to you about the details because it's going to freak you out. And I said, just hit me. Let's see. Like, I'm going to try really hard. And he told some story about like, he was in a combat situation and he was there and, you know, somebody on the other side had been killed and he was really badly maimed, and how he picked up the head of this, like, this insurgent who he had been fighting against and like dropped it by accident and laughed. And he goes, and he was talking about like, this is the experience that I had, like being a person who's holding someone's head and dropping it and laughing about it. And he had a lot of really mixed feelings about it. And then he looked at me and he was like, do you feel differently about me? And I remember that my first instinct was like, wow, that's something I will never experience. But thank you for telling me, because it wouldn't have crossed my mind. A, that's something that somebody ever would experience, or B, that it's something that they struggle with, because I hear that you're laughing and I hear that you laughed in the moment, and now I hear that it's weighing heavy on your heart. Mm-hmm. And so I think that part of that like healing is you need to go into the mess. And I always said this to people, I will, if I can do nothing else, I will sit in the shit with you. And I think that that's what we need to like make that space for it, because war is not, it's not clean. It's not approachable. It doesn't look nice. And so I think a huge part of it is let's make the space for people to talk about the things that hurt, even if it makes us uncomfortable. Yeah. Because Beth, I bet you would have really benefited if you had had more people come and say, like, tell me the hard parts, tell me the gross parts of this. Like, I want to hold that with you.
Yeah, I had the people I had were great to have.
Of course,
but I definitely I put on a really good show.
You do.
Great. I put on, yep. And I just was like, everything is awesome. It reminds me, one of the stories that the young man who ended up killing himself, when he told me his story, the thing he was the most ashamed about, I think, and then he said he would never tell another human, was that he and his twin brother held hands when they were at FOB Phoenix and there was incoming rocket fire. And I just thought, that's such a human thing. Why is that shameful for you? And I just thought it was beautiful because you're in terror. You know, you don't know where that rocket is going to, or the mortar or whatever it was. I can't remember what it was incoming, but like, A, they were lucky enough to deploy together because they were reservists and they were in the same unit. And so whatever, but B, like, that's just human. There is nothing shameful about that in any way, shape, or form. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And he just couldn't. Go ahead.
To find safety in a situation where otherwise you are just feeling deep fear. I think that that's strength. Yeah. And I wish that people could understand the things that they're ashamed of in that way.
You know, when I was in the loony bin, that was the thing that we would talk about a lot, is shame. I taught a loony bin. I went.
I worry that people will hear it and then be like, I don't want to go to the loony bin.
No, look, part of the thing that, like, when I say stuff like that, I try to give people permission that it's okay. You know, and I know, I understand.
I laugh every time. Okay.
I know. And I'm just like, you know, one of the things that we talked a lot about is like shame and how much shame controls you and all the stuff that that it can strangle out of your life. So, you know, as we wrap up, I want to, like, you know, just have one last comment and then we'll close it out, but to talk about this concept that you have an earth that's going to now rage as my writing, healing loudly. And I think heal loudly is maybe one of the best things I've heard. I do that and it makes me feel better. Like, hey, I go to CrossFit and I just get weird. I scare the civilians. I jump, I wear a vest, I run around, I pick up things, I yell. I'm like, here we go. And I run out the front door with a sandbag on, with my vest on, running. And people think I'm crazy. And like, I bring it back in and I'm like, whoo. And they're like, man, I'm like, you're crazy. I'm like, you have no idea.
You're healing.
I'm healing. And that's what I'm telling people. When some of the coaches like, you want to be, what's going on? I'm like, just let me do this, man. I'm healing here. I come here and I let it all out, all my hate. How I felt when I saw Sarah Juden Haqqani taking a vacation in the same countries where they're basing American service members, because there's American service members in UAE and Saudi Arabia. So I get that rage and I heal loudly. And it's important for everybody. I don't care if you're a veteran. I don't care where you are, right? You've been hurt by something in life. You've had some trauma. Like, don't keep it in. That's the worst thing. Please don't do it. I beg of you. Find somebody in your life. We're here to talk to about it. Because keeping it in and like pushing it down and the not examining it, that's where the bad stuff really comes, you know? So with that in mind, I would like to thank you, Beth, for coming on the podcast. It was a great conversation as always.
My favorite.
I tried to behave myself. Hopefully, Kate K's not going to write up my deficiency report later, but I stand ready to receive it. I stand ready to receive it, ma'am. So as we close out, Kate K, you got anything you want to wrap up with? Any parting comments?
Just thank you, I think, because Beth, I have so admired your work, and I remember feeling so grateful to have an opportunity to come on your podcast, and it feels like such a privilege to have you come on ours, because I can't speak for Will, but I know that the majority of why I decided to come on to Shoulder is because I saw how you were helping people, and I wanted to offer them the same. So really, just thank you for being you and giving people permission to heal loudly.
You're so kind. I loved having you guys on. It was such a healing for me episode 2 to just get all that out. And I wanted to make one final comment is that if your listeners haven't listened to Brene Brown, because you talked about shame. Brene Brown, man, she is the queen of killing shame, and it's just so important to do. And that's what storytelling does too, is it helps you get rid of that shame and own the thing. And yeah, there are going to be people who are going to talk shit. Fuck them. Who cares?
Yeah.
You are healing. You are owning your truth, and you're not letting the shame. Yeah, don't let the shame control you. Exactly. Sit and spin. Shame. There will be no shame here. You know, you say whatever the hell you want. I want to hear it, and it's valid. And we all deserve that, to be heard, to heal, to tell our stories. If it happened to you, there's a great Anne Lamott quote, like, if people wanted you to write more warmly about them, they should have behaved better. And there's my mic drop moment for all the people out there who know exactly who the fuck I'm talking about.
Man.
The Taliban.
Dear Lord, help. The Taliban ain't scared of me. They're scared of Beth Bailey. Oh, shit. Oh, shit. Oh shit! If I'm somewhere and I'm a part of Sarah June Hakani's crew and I just heard that, I'd start peeing my pants. But they do that. They do that. They do that stuff often. I'm just letting you know.
They do.
They do.
There's a little
so
golden shower action going on.
Oh yeah, exactly. So here's the thing. I want to thank all of our listeners. Thank you for listening to our podcast. If you have the opportunity, please go ahead and share it with your friends and your family. Hey, even with people you hate, that's fine with me. I don't care. I love anybody to listen to us. And also give us a good review if you can. If you have the time, we truly appreciate it. For Grumpy Combat Veteran Media, this is Will Sober, and I'm saying until next time.